China is at 28, so it's still very much in the top third of the rankings. But there is some way to go, and some of that is about institutions. Basic things like institutions and infrastructure do still matter for competitiveness. It's not really possible to simply rely on technology, for example, as a sort of silver bullet to grow. It's not enough just to rely on human capital. You need to have basic institutions in place, and that includes things not just like policies and frameworks around, for example, intellectual property. That also includes things like the social fabric. That includes things like freedom of the press. And those are all areas that China could improve on. Eric, jump in.
Sure. So one of the questions in the US we debate a lot is whether our education system is very antiquated and has been teaching for the wrong century. In your report, how do you sort of see investing in the workforce in terms of how the US needs to tilt its education system to match the new workforce? At the moment, the US is doing quite well when it comes to that particular pillar as well. Again, #1 economy currently. That doesn't mean that the long-term fundamentals are in place. When it comes to digital skills, the US, along with a number of advanced economies, is actually not doing so well. And if you're going to turn, great ideas all the way through into great products, you need not just the people who will come up with those ideas and the companies that will recognize in a meritocratic basis what those ideas are, but actually the right kinds of skills in place to take that all the way through to product creation.
Saadia, there was a lot of hope that emerging markets would pick up a lot of Western democracies, institutions and culture as well. I see a lot of emerging markets, both within Europe and without of Europe, threatening the independence of the judiciary, threatening the independence of press and hurting freedoms across the board, and committing human rights abuses as well. Are a lot of the emerging market countries slipping down the rankings now?
When you take this broader view and you include things like freedom of the press, you include things like workers' rights, there's a lot of room for growth, not just in the emerging market, but also in the advanced economies. So for example, the US, yes, it's #1, but it needs to do a whole lot more on workers' rights. And that's going to matter in the context of this technological revolution, because there is greater polarization across labor markets. There are the haves and the have-nots. There are the high-skilled workers and the lower-skilled workers. And in that context, there is this sort of growth towards a deterioration of workers' rights.
Yeah, but some of the great hopes from Brazil to Russia to China to Hungary to Poland, a lot of countries that were just flashing green for a lot of the EM strategies a couple of years ago. I'm afraid to say there's some terrible concern, and obviously the events of the last 72 hours or so regarding Saudi Arabia as well. There are a lot of concerns that actually a lot of these countries are going backwards.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what you're saying about there's improvement always in the developed nations as well, but these other countries, it's looking tougher now.
This is why we've created this new compass for economic growth in the future. The idea is, let's integrate what we know about not just focusing on growth, not just focusing on GDP, but you need some of these fundamentals in place if you want longer-term productivity, not just growth today.
Isn't the challenge here the message of inclusiveness? Because it seems to me that if you put the US at the top here and we look at the distribution of wealth since the financial crisis, the Gini coefficient only reveals more unequal distribution, and yet the US comes top.
Yeah.
So the message appears to be, it doesn't actually matter whether you are inclusive and whether you focus on spreading wealth equally. Just being competitive and generating wealth is enough.
Actually, it's very much the opposite. So there are two parts to that answer. One, yes, some of those fundamentals matter. Yes, growth matters. You need to be able to have the wealth creation inside an economy, but you absolutely need to be ensuring that there are redistributive policies, that there is social inclusion, and that matters also for open economies. So yes, globalization is good. It's a win-win between economies, but there are win-losers. There's both winners and losers when it comes to what's happening inside economies. And what we're calling for with this report is that economies that want to be more open, that's a good thing, but those economies also need to put social protection in place. Instead of protecting the specific products or the specific jobs, let's think about protecting those people and giving them the right kind of reskilling opportunities.
The trouble is that the experience since the end of the war has been that European countries that used to work harder than the Americans now work less hard because they have increased taxation to encourage redistribution. ultimately the data suggests that redistributive taxation is bad for growth, bad for productivity, and bad for working hours. That's just the data. How do we get that message to change if we think it should be more inclusive growth?
So our data is actually showing that there is no trade-off. There's no trade-off between having higher growth and at the same time having social inclusion. Now, you can't have everything at once. You do need to be thinking about the longer term for those trends to hold true.
Hey everybody, it's Hadley Gamble from our new CNBC Middle East Bureau in Abu Dhabi. Thanks for stopping by. Now, to watch more, you can try one of the videos that just popped up on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe.